So today we have Casey and Sara and Cassie, and we're going to talk about lameness exam of the horse. In case it wasn't obviously a horse, we're going to talk about lameness of.
Yeah, we could do lameness of the instructors as well. In a lameness, you can pretty much tell which leg is the bothersome one, but where on that leg is the question. You can sort of narrow things down and start to eliminate places where it may not be a problem by flexing each of the joints individually, one at a time, separately, so that if you flex that joint to its fullest degree, and that causes the horse to be more lame, then that was probably where the issue is. You can also do nerve blocks, where you numb portions of the hoof with an injection, but then you get into more exorbitant cost. So it can be better to start with the flexion test first, and then do nerve block. If you need to, it'll just narrow down where you have to do nerve blocks. The same with x-rays. Each x-ray you take is going to cost money, so you want to limit where you need to have x-rays done. So let's do, and please excuse Sarah's mud and dirt. She didn't know she was going to be on TV, so she's a little messy this morning. Good girl. The important thing when you're doing flexion tests is to make sure you're only flexing what you wanted to flex. So if I wanted her to bend her elbow, for example, I can't hold this up because that's going to then bend the knee. So whichever part you don't want to fold has to hang loosely and not have pressure put on it. If I do want to bend the knee, I'm going to make sure I don't bend below the knee. And a normal horse, they should be able to touch the heel to that elbow. So Sarah's got a little bit of a limit in her range of motion, how far she can flex that knee. And to go lower, you have to release the knee so that now you could bend the fetlock up. Don't forget that there's also the coffin joint here, so you don't want to curl the hoof. Then you're getting both the coffin joint and the fetlock joint at the same time. So keep the pastern flat with the hoof and just fold the fetlock joint up. And then to get the coffin joint, keep everything hanging loosely. Hold right around the pastern so you don't accidentally bend the fetlock, and then tip the hoof back as far as you can to get flexion at the coffin joint. Good girl. And then in the hind leg, everyone should remember from your previous videos that the stifle and the hock are connected. They cannot be individually flexed or straightened. They work together. So if you had a hind end lameness and you flexed the hock and stifle, you would know it's in one of those two, and then you'd have to go with x-rays and nerve blocks and whatnot. So the reciprocal apparatus means that when this joint bends, this one's going to bend also. But you can bend those, good girl, without bending the fetlock. And I'm not bending this. This is loose. She can still hold that, but you keep this pulled up. I don't know if you can see that the patella and the stifle are bent right there by my arm, and I'm just holding that up as tightly as I can. If I don't take it to its full flexion, then she might not be bothered by it. And we are trying to bother her a bit so we can pinpoint where she's sore. If you were going to, good girl, if you're going to get the fetlock, you want to keep the leg low, and again keep the pastern and the hoof in a straight line and flex that back as far as you can. I'm not putting pressure up on that hock. I'm letting the hock hang so that there's downward pressure into the fetlock and then up on this side, but I'm not bending this one with any force. And the same as in the front leg. To do the coffin joint, you would leave the fetlock loose, hold the pastern, tip the hoof. If you don't hold her by the pastern, when you tip the hoof, it's going to tip the fetlock also. Did you get that wrong?
Just say it again.
So if I hold her pastern, then I can just tip the hoof itself. If I don't hold her pastern, the whole fetlock's going to go. Girl. So the point of a flexion test would be to stress that joint enough that then when you start moving her, the limp is more pronounced because you've irritated the joint more. So that would make it more obvious. And again, you can pinpoint where in the leg she's laying. So do you want to do jogging away now?
Sure, let's try that. Yep.
So in a veterinary exam, the vet will flex the joint and hold it. 2 minutes would be great. Some horses won't, and some veterinarians can't last that long too. They won't let you hold for 2 minutes. So if you can get past a minute at least, that would probably be minimum. I'm not going to do a minute because we're just making a video. But if we're going to check this reciprocal apparatus and check for any hock or stifle issues, I'm going to fold that leg up, and then my assistant, Casey, would either be timing me or I'm timing myself. And then just before we're ready to go, I've got to warn Casey that we're going to take off so that she can start Sara moving right away. If we let her stand here for a few seconds, the pressure will ease off of that joint. Now you can see why it's hard to hold this for 2 minutes. I've held this at least for a minute, or as long as I can hold it without the horse starting to fall over or myself falling over. I'll ask my handler to get ready, warn her, and maybe do a countdown before I drop the joint so she can get ready to jog off. And you're just going to go straight, Casey, whichever way she's pointed.
Yep.
Okay? Are you ready? 3, 2, 1, go. Good, perfect. You do want to make sure you take the horse in a straight line, which Casey did. If you swerve all around, it's hard to determine how she's using that particular leg. And you do want to jog right away as soon as the foot comes down. Again, because if we let her stand there and ease the tension out of that joint, it's not going to be as obvious if that were the lame place. If she's not any different jogging off, then you haven't found where she's lame. You would try a different joint. So then you maybe go to the fetlock, coffin joint. So if there's no difference in the jog before the flex and after the flex, then that's not the problem area. And some horses, especially older ones, are going to be a little bit stiff the first 1 or maybe 2 steps anyway. So you forgive them that, but if they continue to limp, then that would be an issue.
Okay.
We're on?
Yep.
Okay. So I'm just going to demonstrate how you would use a hoof tester to check for possible pain in the hoof. Most lamenesses are in the hoof, so that can be one place to start looking when you're trying to figure out why a horse is lame. So the hoof tester is just a giant pincher, and it can exert tremendous force into a tiny little area. And if there is a problem in the hoof, if there's an abscess, a bruise, any sort of dysfunction with the coffin bone or the navicular bone, if you apply pressure to that, the horse will react, and she'll yank her foot, or she'll throw her head, or she'll try to get away. Some horses are just particular about having their feet picked up and handled. Those of you that work with Blue and Gina and Francis, you know that. So if you get a reaction, you need to then just go back and recheck it. If you're getting a reaction every single time you apply pressure in that point, then that can be considered a positive result. If she reacted once but not the second time, then she was probably just fidgeting anyway. So in order to use the hoof testers and have them be effective, you need both hands. So instead of holding the hoof as you would for hoof picking, you've got to hold it like a farrier would, and that's going to be tucking your leg around her hoof so that you can cradle the hoof between your knees. And this is not a comfortable position, and it's not a pretty position, but this is how you hold the hoof so that your hands are free. So you have to be systematic about how you use this. You can't just randomly go around and pinch, because you won't keep track of what areas you've tested, what areas you've not tested. So start on an edge, start on one side, and just squeeze the end of the handle, because if you squeeze down low, it's not going to provide as much pressure due to some physics reason, which I don't know. And you're just going around the edge, give a squeeze, and then move on to the next spot. So the horse hoof is very hard. It's rock solid on the outside. So you would not be able to apply enough pressure to make a difference with your own hand. You can't go around and push on it with your fingers. You need the tool that has the leverage that can apply enough force to kind of get through that solid surface. And just as I was going around here, I felt her twinge a little bit, so I went back and checked it again, and she didn't react the second time. So it was probably coincidental. And you can then go a little bit deeper in the hoof and test the sole. So you pinch around so that your hoof tester comes a bit deeper into the foot. And you can test across the heels or one heel at a time. Sarah, good girl. You need to be careful about putting pressure right on the frog, though, because that is sensitive anyway. If you squeeze on that, she's going to react just in normal daily life. But you can get right to the point of the frog. And on the outside of the hoof, you just have to be careful not to get your hoof tester up into the coronet or coronary band up here. Again, because that's going to be more sensitive. That's softer skin. So if you get your hoof tester up there, she is going to react. That is going to be painful. So you've got to keep it low down on the solid part of the hoof. All right, I'm going to set her down. Good job. Now when you hold the hind foot, it's even a bit more awkward. Good girl. Because of the way the hind foot bends. You can't wrap your leg around this one. What you have to do is get underneath it and try to make a little sling out of your thigh and your knee where you can rest the fetlock so that the hoof is free. And I'm also going to keep my elbow back here to keep her hock from sliding this direction and dropping the hoof down. And then you would just go around, same thing, all the way around the edges, do the sole, do the heels, and then let her set down. Good girl.
coincidentally, when we brought Sara out to be our demo horse for this lab, lunging her in the outdoor arena, we found she actually did have a little bit of a limp. It wasn't enough to make a huge head bob, but there is a head bob. It's very slight, and if you watch the video, you can probably see that. So, in thinking that most lamenesses occur down in the hoof, you can start there, and you should all know from your physical exams that you would check for the digital pulse and then compare it to the other legs. If you just feel this one leg and say, oh yes, there's a pulse, but you go to all of the legs and all of the legs have a pulse, then this wouldn't be accurate, just checking one. So you find the artery that runs down the edges of the fetlock, and you can almost see it when you're up close. If there's a little bit of a bulge there. You can definitely feel it. If you run your finger across, it goes over the speed bump of that artery. So right where it comes across that fetlock is where you can apply light pressure. And you may feel a slight throb. Some horses normally have a little bit of a pulse, but if it's very strong, if it's a pounding pulse, then that indicates pain in that hoof. And then you would compare it to the other one. And then I always do things twice anyway, just to make sure I was accurate in what I found. Good girl. So I can actually feel, earlier when we were checking her, I could feel a pulse in this foot. Now there's a pulse in both feet. And it's strong enough to be obvious. You can also feel for heat around the hoof, but this is not the most scientific way to check for a problem because your hand is going to make the horse warm. So if you're touching and checking for heat, you've got to just set it there for a second and move. And again, compare it to the other hoof. And I don't feel any area that's warmer on this foot than it is on that foot. I'm checking up around the cornet band and just below that. So if you were feeling for heat, you just check for a second and then move your hand, because the longer you leave your hand there, the warmer it's going to feel. Then you can take the hoof testers, which we demonstrated, and examine that foot to see if you can get a reaction. Okay. Yeah, I'm just going to clear the sand out of her foot, because it could be something as blatant as a nail in her foot or a rock in her foot. So you do want to pick the foot clean. You check for things like certainly embedded foreign bodies, but maybe signs of thrush, if there's a black, gooey odorous gunk on the sides of the frog or even in the central sulcus of the frog, that can indicate thrush, which can be bad enough to make them lame. And I don't see anything abnormal in her foot, so I'll go on with the hoof tester. Good girl. You also just want to be careful too when you do this that you don't take the leg really sideways. If you stand way out there, she's going to be uncomfortable anyway, and she's going to try to pull away from you. So you keep the leg as close underneath her as you can. And maybe you could have seen that in the video. She gave a little twitch.
Yeah.
Just right there.
Just do that.
So I'll do that again.
Okay, yeah.
And I don't get any reaction that time, so she was just twitching anyway.
Oh, okay.
No reaction at that time. Make sure you, again, are systematic, that you go around the hoof and test every point. If you spread your pinches out too far, if I pinch here and then go all the way down to here, then I've skipped this entire area. So just cover as much area as your hoof testers will have contact with, and then move on to the next little space. Now, this heel, there was a little twitch there, so I'll check this one and then I'll go back. There's a little twitch there. I don't know if you can see it in the video.
Oh, yeah.
Yep.
Sorry.
Good girl. So, 3 times out of 4, I got a little bit of a twitch just in this outside heel portion of her hoof. So possibly, maybe there's an abscess, maybe there's a big grit up in her foot that's making her a little uncomfortable. But what I felt was her shoulder tense up. So it wasn't a huge reaction. She didn't jerk away from me. She didn't try to leap up in the air. But 3 times out of 4, when I pinched that section, the shoulder muscle just made a little clench. So you could investigate further with the nerve block. Maybe the hoof knife can pare away a little of the sole of the foot and see if there's something down low that can be pulled out. And if you don't find anything there, then you'd move on and do some flexion tests. Do you want me to go ahead with those? Or?
Yeah, go ahead and flex it. Just flex it to see if there's any pain on flexion. We didn't have to hold it for like 2 minutes or anything.
You would get, if you had pain in the joint and you put or exerted force on it and pressure to make it flex, if that's painful to her, she's going to do the same kind of thing, where she's going to jerk her leg or twitch or try to get away. So keeping this knee loose, you can flex the fetlock and the coffin joint, which I did while I was talking. And you can check the knee. And you can see this leg, she's got much more flexion than on the other leg we demonstrated. She couldn't get that leg all the way up. But I'm not holding these joints in a flexed position while I check the knee. And she's not complaining about any of that. Sometimes when you release the joint, if they're reluctant to put that foot down again, that can mean there's pain in it. Maybe she didn't react while you held it flexed, but then when she tries to straighten it again, it can be very painful. So like with whiteout, when she lifts her hind legs, she doesn't want to put them down right away. It's very hard for her to straighten it out, so she kind of eases down into that. So that would be another thing to notice, is whether she puts the foot right down or whether she holds it off the ground for